It's on. So I'm calling to order a meeting of the Finance, Taxation, and Assessment Committee. Present are members Janelle Robinson, Mr. O'Brien, Ms. Farrell, and myself, Judy Doche, the chair. Also present is our President, Corey Ellis, and our President Pro Tem, Richard Conti, along with our temporary staff member, Jared Pellerin, and Michelle Andre. He's never going to live it down. Also present is Council Member Owusu Anani. With us today is the treasurer. Our topics of discussion are the fourth quarter report for 2018, which makes it the end of the year report, treasurer's report, the first quarter report for 2019, and then I've also added in a little bit of want to discuss the most recent ban issuance. And we'll get to that a little bit later. If nobody has any objections, I want to recognize also City Auditor Sue Rizzo is here. If nobody has any objections, I'd like to start with a discussion of the fourth quarter 2018 report. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Shantz.
Sure. The long and the short of it is essentially that we ended up with about a $3 million surplus last year, due mostly to, I should say due entirely really to the higher than expected sales tax revenue and lower than expected retiree health care costs. That's contained in the first paragraph. What that has effectively done is build our fund balance up a little bit more this year to about $9.1 million. Which is a very, big step in the positive direction. However, we are not near where we need to be for fiscal stress purposes and really, best practices. We want to be at about 10% of our expenses, which is for the city to be in the neighborhood of $17 to $18 million. I think, we can go through the report if there's any specific questions that you have. Salaries were a little bit lower compared to 2017, and fringe benefits were down a fair amount from 2017. But to budget, we were, just go to the personnel benefits, we were over budget on salaries. Under budget on fringe benefits overall, retirement expenses. Overall, again, we were down, we were about $6.8 million under budget for disbursements, which is good. So we list some of the budget variations here on the first page of the report. Some specific ones. If there's any questions on any of those, we can go through them. We also have Nick Blaze from the budget office here who can answer any specific questions that have not been covered in here. I think what's crucial, I think, for everyone to understand yet again is that yes, we had a surplus this year. Yes, we have a fund balance of about $9 million. But without the $12 million in assistance from New York State, we would have had a massive deficit, and we would be in dire financial straits. We're fortunate that for the past several years, the mayor has been able to get that money from the state, and they haven't provided too much of a problem. Right now they are holding on $5 million of the $12 million. They did the same thing last year. They held back on $3 million out of the $12 million.
They're holding back $5 million?
Yeah, they budgeted it in two separate budget lines at the state, and one they basically said, well, we'll have to get that one to you at the end of the year, basically. I think that they're, I can't speak for them, obviously, but I don't know if they're looking at saying, well, things are going great, you don't need that $5 million, you don't need that $3 million, so we're not going to give it to you, but they didn't provide a problem last year on that, so I don't expect they will this year. But they've split it up. They also split up the payments for the pilot revenue. We used to just bill it towards the end of the year, towards November, the entire shot. I realized a few years ago, actually, that they were supposed to be doing it in April and in November, so they have started to pay us the first half in the springtime and the second half towards the end of the year. So I still expect them to do that with the capital city funding as well, but anything's possible, I suppose.
Donna,
Yep.
you might not know this off the top of your head. What are the two different budget lines?
One is from the Empire State Facilities Corporation, I think is what it is. And the other one, I think, is from the general fund. Yeah, but I think the $5 million is from the Empire State Facilities Corporation.
So it's from the general fund line and the
ESF,
Empire
I
State.
think is what it is, yeah.
Okay, so let me just get this right. So we're receiving $5 million from the Empire State, the two budget lines, Empire State Facilities Corporation, and the rest comes from the general.
I believe it comes from the general fund. I think it's the second payment coming from the Facilities Corporation that was, I believe that's where it comes from, off the top of my head. All right.
Have we received it?
Huh?
Have we received it?
We have not received the $7 million yet. We billed it, and we expect to receive it shortly. I'm going to be following up with them. It doesn't put us in a cash bind yet, but if it takes another month or two, then yes, it will. We do. I don't expect it's going to be a problem.
So I have a question on the end of year report,
Yes.
if that's okay with the chair.
What?
It is a
Yeah.
question.
We are focusing on the end of the year
Yes.
report right now,
Yeah.
and I want to deal with any questions people have about that, and then we'll move on to the first quarter.
Yeah, so how, in terms of the $3 million surplus, how much of that is attributable to vacancies, in particular police? And since we don't have a contract right now with is it patrol? With the major unit,
You guys.
the police contract, when did that expire?
Yeah, can you come up, because otherwise we can't hear you.
Yes, Nick, you might as well take a seat. So joining us is Nick Blaze from the Budget Office. Your
So-
title these days?
What's that?
Your title?
Chief Financial Manager in the Budget Office.
So my question, my basic question is in terms of the, how much attributable to police vacancies, other vacancies as well, but police seems to be the biggest one. And since I believe we do not have a contract going back further, it's quite possible once we do have something, there might be some retroactive going back to last year, which could also potentially eat into the $3 million. So I'm just wondering how much of that $3 million is real, or how much is really due to factors such as the lack of a contract, and I'm not sure if there are any other big contracts
The $3 million
out there
surplus?
for last year.
Yeah, it really is attributable to the two things that I talked about, were sales tax and retiree health care. There is, I don't know the precise numbers, and Nick might, but there is a significant savings, I think, on the police side and fire as well due to vacancies. However, that usually gets eaten up by contractual raises that have come through, as well as overtime, as well as buyouts when people retire.
Can we get
Wait, just a moment. Richard, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, in both cases, they seem to be on overtime where they were in the previous year, although they're still over budget. So to some extent, I know some of those savings from vacancies are eaten up by overtime, but I'm not sure just how much of that really happens. So I'm just trying to get,
Yeah, I think
because
if
people
you-
talk about the $3 million, you have $3 million, you keep on running the surplus, but some of that is attributable to other factors that are not currently
Yeah.
that we need to really be
Well,
considering.
and that's the largest, I think everyone should take away from this, that we had a surplus this year because of two events that no one, I think, necessarily saw coming budgetarily, which is a fairly dramatic increase in sales tax revenue and a good year for retiree health. And we've had instances like this in the past few years as well that have helped to bring back the fund balance. But those events that happened in the past didn't happen this year, you know. I think, if you take out the 1.8 to 1.6 from sales tax and retiree health care, overall the budget would be in a deficit, about $500,000.
When we have retirements, not health right now, retirements and, buyouts, et cetera, that comes out of that department's
Yeah,
budget,
yes,
correct?
yes.
So anything that happened in 2018 would be coming out of the police budget?
Yes.
related to- And I'm not sure we've had more retirements this year than last year, that's just my perception, but that's
Don't know.
Happening all the time.
I have reminded, by the way, the chief of the requirement of the quarterly reports and other issues on staffing, et cetera. I know he's been preoccupied with some other stuff recently, but that's been the problem. We haven't gotten those reports to really get a handle.
The increase in overtime slightly offset the vacancies.
Yes.
The savings that were created from that, but it did not meet that level.
It did not exceed the savings?
Correct. They're over where they were at the same point last year, but it's impacted operations. They're still inversing people and forcing them to work doubles. There's a lot of overtime that's not necessarily voluntary, but
Can we get the numbers on that? And also for general
Numbers
services?
Numbers on what?
The numbers on overtime as compared to vacancy savings?
Yep.
Department by department, because in early June, Sergio came to our General Services Committee, and he was questioned about it, and he estimated, because he has a lot of seasonal workers, but he estimated that he had about 20% vacancy in his personal services budget, which he admitted, because everybody was screaming at him about potholes, which he admitted directly impacted his ability to provide services. And also in forestry, I think he was down at one point almost 100% in forestry, and now he's back up to about 50%. So
The numbers on vacancies compared to,
vacancy, number on vacancy savings compared then to comparable overtime, department by
compensating
department.
overtime, you mean? Like,
Compensated
You're
over.
essentially asking for a difference between what was budgeted in the way of and you're looking for end of year for 2018 or for current?
in
Well,
general?
end of year for 2018, and if you can do it for current, that would be great.
we have that, and we can get that to you.
So we're looking, just to be clear, the way you would calculate that, Nick, is it's the difference between what was budgeted for salaries and what we're actually paying out
Yeah.
for that versus what we're paying out in the way of
Overtime.
overtime. And would it be appropriate to include retirement or healthcare savings?
Yeah, you want to factor all that in, and then you have the buyout cost that was mentioned as well. So they'll retire, they'll get a buyout, and then, it impacts staffing, like you were saying with Sergio, it's tough. It impacts department operations, so although it's cheaper, to be down that many people and then to
Get
fill it with
services.
overtime, yeah, you're forcing a lot of people to do doubles. or
Especially
triples and
for the
stuff.
lower salaried individuals.
Exactly.
Where the healthcare benefits are really proportionally higher. So, since you're pointing out that you then also need to look at the buyouts, is it possible to sort of provide us a chart and then the summary of what that savings is?
Absolutely, yeah, we have.
And Nick over here is gladly looking to help you out because he is nodding yes, you can absolutely do that.
Well, we have all this stuff for fire, and kind of branching into what Richard's saying is overtime affects departments differently, and Nick was alluding to that as well, where police has certain things where they get called to kind of regardless of how many staff they have. You have certain departments that accrue overtime in different ways, where the fire department has set schedules and set manning, where if they're fully staffed staff, they have 14 extra people per platoon to help cover shifts. The fewer people they have, the more overtime you're going to see realized. We have all that data broken down, and we can submit that, but also kind of going into what you're looking for in the analysis, there's going to be pre-existing overtime for police and DGS that would exist regardless of if you had the vacancies or if you didn't. Where fire, a lot of theirs is based on the total number of vacancies. So it kind of has to be broken down on a department by department level. But we can explain that to you guys as well.
So what's a reasonable time frame for us to follow up with you to make sure we receive this information?
Fires I have done, I'm the CFM of the fire department. I can't speak for the others.
We can get that to you probably by the end of next week. That's not a problem.
Michelle, could you put that as a tickler? Or,
It's on the record.
yeah. Well, I think it's a really good question. I don't want us bugging you guys, so that's why I'm asking, before we should. But because the question has been asked and you guys are agreeing to that, I just want to have some mechanism for making sure it doesn't then fall through the cracks.
Yeah, we have that. I just want to, verify and go over and make sure that's presentable before we submit it.
Great. Terrific. I appreciate that. Other questions from committee members about the end of the year report?
Yes. Are departments coming in under budget? And then what are they instructed to do when they expect to come in under budget?
That's the second part of the question.
Okay, so Jamel, are you talking about the end of the year report or are you talking about this year?
Well, I'm talking about the end of the year report, and then if there was departments did come under budget at the end of the year of last year, what were they instructed to do, or how does that process work?
All right. Do you understand that?
I'd say overall, it's kind of a mishmash. I think overall the city was at, if you take out the two items that I was talking about, the city was basically at about $500,000 over budget. But that being said, some of the departments, it varies department to department. I don't think there was a huge variation department to department. That being said, overtime is still a big budget buster in police and fire in particular. As for instructions, there really is not, I don't know if there's any particular instructions for being over or under budget what to do. I think, best fiscal practice would be to, book that, if you're under budget, book that revenue to the fund balance. Essentially, you come in under budget, congratulations, we got an extra, $50,000 we didn't spend. If you're over budget, depends on what you're over budget on, and try to adjust your budget for the following year, and see where we can make the individual departments whole on where they are over budget.
When do we,
And I don't speak for the administration. Nick might have something to add to as well.
That's accurate.
What Darius was saying, if it's.
And you come on
come
to,
on up, Nick?
I like talking from the bullpen.
Nick,
Less pressure.
your last name is escaping me?
Riley.
Riley, I'm sorry.
So there's really two ways a department could be under budget. One would be by vacancies, which unless they don't rehire, that's just going to continue through the end of the year. If they're under budget on their equipment or stuff that they would purchase, like items like that, every November, the purchasing department will send out an email to all departments, and they really start restricting purchase orders towards the end of the year to kind of prevent departments from, seeing that, hey, we're $300,000 under budget on equipment, let's just buy. So that's kind of a guideline that the city has, or a policy to kind of prevent that and ensure that, come November when they start restricting new purchase orders, that the department will end the year under budget as well.
You're also, as a department, not allowed to spend beyond what's budgeted for non-personnel lines, so that's what the budget transfers throughout the year for. And police and fire overtime regularly go over budget, and that's something we monitor and we think there's room for improvement on. But as part of weekly payroll journals, we make course corrections for anything that we think may be over budget throughout the year.
Gotcha. So do departments generally, if they see that they can implement another program or something else at the end of the year because they're coming under budget, is that encouraged, or is it more discouraged?
I think it would be taken on a
It's
case-by-case
difficult,
basis. Yeah, I mean, depending on what the project is, and typically at the end of the year, they would talk with Mike in the mayor's office and see if it's something that's feasible or not for them to implement, but it would be handled on a case-by-case basis.
It's also very rare, I think, for any department to be so under budget that they could dream up or think of a new program to do with the money. It just doesn't really happen. Not at the city anyway.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, so we have a closeout resolution. We usually get that like sometime in September, is that the norm?
Yeah, I think, I don't think we started yet. but
Maybe we get it at the end of August.
Hopefully, audit is going on right now, so I think we had it a little bit later on in the season, but I think things are going pretty well thus far with the audit, and we've kind of gotten to the place where we're ahead of the game a little bit. Hopefully that'll continue, and you never know. But yeah, that'll be done. I think Nick and Ken used to do it himself to prepare it, but I think Nick and Ken will work on it.
I think Mike already has that too.
Oh, does
Just needs to submit it to your office. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, good. Mike?
I want to ask a question that was submitted before, and it was the revenues for the landfill
Yes.
being up by 10%.
Mhm.
Did that impact in the space available within the landfill?
No.
Because right now,
well,
we
yes
have
and
this very extended date of closure, 2026, to the extent that we basically froze any plans for transfer station, et cetera.
If you have the email there, which I didn't bring with me, there's a response from
Yes.
landfill
So
to Judy's question.
it says, see responses below.
Top soil cover is where most of it's soil cover.
Oh, it's soil
Yeah.
cover.
Right.
Which, can I ask you one other question, which
You
is
can
not
ask,
so
I don't know
much
if I can
you,
answer.
it's DGS. Their trash fee, which we all get phone calls about, expires at the end of this year, has to be formally renewed.
Yep.
And right in the ordinance, it says, we are supposed to be, I think, at least annual, maybe biannually, submitted information based on the true costs of collection and disposal of municipal trash. And I don't think we've gotten those numbers in a while.
Well, I think we
We
did
did.
get them during the last budget discussion.
Yes,
I
yes.
insisted on
But I
that.
mean, I thought it was nice to get it before that big budget rush.
Well, I think
And I sent a note,
it's supposed to accompany the mayor's recommendation for the fee for the ensuing year. And so that's when we're supposed to get those. Because the fee is supposed to be based on cost.
yeah. But I thought rather than have everything come into the budget rush, particularly since we're getting complaints about it now, they must have workable numbers from last year or from this year, because actually my understanding, there would have been a spike because the cost of disposing of recyclables skyrocketed. So if we could get that before we get buried with everything else we got in the budget.
Well, again, I said you could ask, but I don't know if I can answer.
I did,
And
I did
cannot
ask
answer.
Sergio, and I didn't get a response.
I'm sure you did, but I don't have much to offer in that regard. So,
Yeah. But
I have sent an email noting to, I think you were copied on it, and Mike Wheeler and others, that reminding folks that the trash fee ordinance is sunsetting, and that there needs to be some legislation put forward, preferably before the budget is developed, relying on it, because this has been a discussion at the swamp meetings, and I think that people anticipated that there would be some sort of collective decision or discussion, at least a discussion about it, before it just, whatever happens, appears in the budget.
And the swamp meetings, we haven't had one in months now.
I would,
But so,
I would just add just more food for thought here is that I think, I'd say sooner rather than later would be helpful to my office, in part because I think I may have figured out a way to get it onto the tax bill as a charge and not a tax, but it would require changing, as best I can tell at this point, not having gone through everything that I can go through. If it is penalized at the same rate in the same way a late tax bill is penalized, I think we can get it onto the tax bill starting in January.
So-
think about the
so
ramifications
you would
of
like
that.
to know
I would
if you're
like to, yes.
adding that to the tax bill
Yeah.
sometime in preferably
I think by
November.
By November, yeah.
And so that also suggests that, you know, if we're going to take a couple months to discuss it here and put it on the agenda and committee agenda and discussions, we should have it soon.
So can the budget office give DGS a little bit of a nudge?
We can. It
To
was
send
my
us it?
understanding that we were gonna submit that with the regular budget documents and the
Yeah, but-
trash fee, but I'll see if we can
Yeah.
follow up and get that sooner.
Yeah, I think it's much more desirable to have it ahead of time.
I just have a question on the topic of the trash fee. As 2.8 million was budgeted for the trash fee. Are we still on schedule to make that 2.8?
It depends on whether people pay late. I think the amount that we actually ended up billing, and it's also going to go down because I think everyone had presumed that people knew about eligibility for things like Enhanced Star, and even low income and low income disabled and low income senior tax abatements that would make those people eligible for a waiver of their their trash fee. We're finding that there's a large chunk of people who are likely eligible and didn't know it. So that is going to probably provide a few more exemptions for the trash fee bill. I think as put forth, the figure was, I think it was 2.8 in the budget. I think it ended up being 2.5-ish, which was actually billed. But that does not take into account late fees, which end up kind of being put in the same pool. I think that because this has gone to, dealing with the late fee issue is going to be something I think we need to discuss further. I'll know more in a month or so as to whether or not the structure that's in place, which is $50 for a late fee and then $100 for a late fee if you don't pay after 3 months and 6 months, whether or not we think that's appropriate, especially for a $90 waste collection fee where you're going to get tagged with a $50 and then essentially a $150 late fee on top of a $90 fee, whether or not that's appropriate.
The catch there
Yeah.
being, even if we continued a straight flat fee, because that makes up for over $300,000 of that amount, then if you reduce the late fee, then you really need to increase the flat fee in order to be budget neutral
Gotcha.
on it.
Which makes it a lot easier if it's part of the tax bill as opposed to a standalone bill.
And with about 30,000 units, that would be about a $10 per unit increase.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a round.
No, I'm thinking in terms of tax bills, which is about 18,000. Like, okay, probably 30,000 is probably the unit.
Per unit, right, yeah.
So for us to be budget neutral, like you were saying, do we have to increase it at next year's?
I think we'll know more.
Okay.
I mean, if I were to defend a guess at this point, I would say that $100 is probably appropriate, especially if we are able to put it on the tax bill and have a late fee for that be on the order of what it is for property taxes, which is 4% in February and then 1% per month thereafter. It may have to go higher, but I think we have to crunch those numbers because part of the whole problem, one of the reasons why this has been so difficult is that we do not have an easy way to deal with the exemptions on the waste collection fee bills that happened in the past. And not that it was easy in the past when we're dealing with just multi-units. That was difficult too. But the enhanced star exemption has gone from being something that is available to us on our real property tax database to something that is sometimes available on that database and sometimes not if people switch to go to the state and get their check instead of having the abatement off their property taxes. We are slowly getting to the point where we may be able to get at least 80% of eligibility exemptions for enhanced star from the state in a semi-workable form as of early August. But what they have done in the past with this database that they have that they provide to the assessor's office essentially doesn't allow us to pick out which ones are the enhanced stars and then go through them very easily. It's like it's very 1985 the database, like our old database here. We're working to try and find out ways to make it easier, but thus far it hasn't proven as simple as possible. And that also doesn't take into account the individuals who are now learning of their eligibility for a low-income senior, low-income disabled exemption because they're on SSI or because they're on SSD or because they are actually a low-income senior. And we're now, I think, applying for exemptions. And then I think once we get through this process, we're going to have a better handle on how many people are actually exempt in the city of Albany. So we talk about exempt property in the city of Albany. There's a whole host of properties in the city that have an exemption on them because they have the little exemption for senior star or senior disabled, or I'm sorry, senior low-income senior and low-income disabled. So.
Thank you. Just one next question. Is there a difference between a fund balance and also a cash fund balance, or is it like similar? It's the same thing?
The fund balance that we report is the unrestricted fund balance. So you can take that as a cash fund balance. But there's other fund balances that we have that are restricted. So our restricted fund balance is higher than $9 million.
Yeah, provide an example or two.
Debt reserve.
What is it? I didn't hear you, sorry.
Debt reserve is one of them. Like special use thing. I think landfill is one. We don't have very many, but they do exist. And there's.
Owusu, just
Yeah, what I was saying is that I'm not sure if you answered this first question. Right now, our fund balance is $9.1 million. For us to be fiscally sound, we have to get to $18 million?
18 would be optimal, yeah.
Okay, 18, thank you.
18 would be optimal, at least under the current budget.
All right, unless we have further questions, I'd like to move on to the first quarter report for 2019.
Things are stable. I think the biggest news I think that would come out of this one is that once again the sales tax is you'll see here the sales tax on the second line of the chart here. Theoretically, what you want is 25% in the column over here for every budget item. That's you're at the quarter, so you want it to be 25%. Doesn't always work that way. With sales tax, you're usually at about 22, 23% at this point in the year. And the fact that we are at 25% is a good sign. And then we actually just got in the second quarter figures, and we're actually at 52% of budget on sales tax revenue at this point, which is about 3 to 4% over what we usually are at. Meaning that we run the possibility of having a surplus on sales tax this year towards the end of the year. We'll have to wait and see if that actually happens or not. But overall, I think we're essentially where we expect to be. There aren't a lot of major surprises. I think.
So 2% would be about $750,000.
For sales tax.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the year, we're looking at about, if trends hold right now, perhaps a 36 million to 36.5 million figure coming in, which would put us 1.5 to $2 million over budget for sales tax revenue, if that comes in. So
That would be nice.
the last quarter is always, essentially the first quarter is low, second and third quarters are kind of the same, and then the fourth quarter, which is Christmas time, is high, and kind of makes up for the first two. So, but since we're already at 52%, that bodes well for the rest of the year.
Other questions from committee members? on the first quarter report. I would like just to note that the overtime continues to make astound me a bit. Now, overtime
Yeah.
being, at the end, this is first quarter report. We're at 69% for fire, 42% for parks maintenance. That doesn't make intrinsic sense to me.
I think if you have specific questions on the individual lines.
Fleet maintenance, 84%. DGS administration, 88%. That one I really, considering last year, I think it was,
True, but it's only a $3,000 budget.
so I'd like a little bit better, if we can get more information about what's driving that.
In the two largest departments, it's definitely vacancies and the delayed hiring for fire. Well, yeah, I'll cover police quick too. I mean, as you know, they're down and they've been pretty active in trying to identify the new spot for training. But they have made
But they're
some-
actually for this, they're like, 26%. Which for first, of budget, I mean, it's still a lot of money, but, because we budget $4 million for overtime for.
Yeah, that's actually not that bad for them for the first quarter, but compared to where they were last year at the same point, they're still a little higher. The
Right.
vacancies have definitely impacted that department a lot. They're still inversing people, but I did have a chance to follow up with Deputy Chief Donahue, and he said that they have made some progress for their plans to reduce court overtime. I can read you an email I got from them quick, because I was curious about this myself. I've been going back and forth with him saying, do we have anything in the works, because that's something on everybody's list. But he said they have a new court notification procedure, which would cause a reduction in court overtime, at least. And they plan on having that in place hopefully by mid-August. And they're also working on a cloud-based solution for sharing some evidence, and they're going to work a way in to share other case documents, which would cut back on court conferences. So that was pretty high, and we're optimistic about ways to reduce that in the future. We think there's still some efficiencies. I'll get you the numbers on that.
Offhand, if memory serves, I think it was $300,000 for 2018. I think.
I just want to,
I want to first give committee members an opportunity.
Yeah,
no,
400,000.
just on the topic of overtime. Sometimes we think that just because overtime is offered, a lot of employees take it. I know the administration is working really hard to kind of build some morale with certain department heads, have a barbecue and those things. But I just want to stress that, with these high overtime numbers, even when you're trying to build morale, sometimes these things are making you take the steps back. And we have to start figuring out, do we need to hire more people? Because these individuals who are working overtime.
Forced overtime.
Say again?
Forced.
Forced overtime is bringing morale down. Although the administration is having these barbecues and having all these other gatherings, trying to build morale, but these forced overtimes is making these departments take a step back. And I just hope that we could start looking into trying to address this moving forward instead of saying, well, we had less overtime than last year. I mean, last year was a high overtime hours. Doesn't mean that we are where it should be. So I just want to echo that if there's ways that we need to hire more people, then let's do it instead of all these overtime, because it's bringing morale down.
That's what the administration is doing.
Yeah,
I think it depends on the department too.
It does depend on the department, and again, I love to talk about the fire one because we have that pretty much down to a science now. But in terms of what you're saying, it's almost two parts. One is the fact that, there are these, sort of events that are generating overtime by, getting them out in the community, doing things like that. But then is hiring more people the solution to that?
No, and I wasn't saying those events. What I'm saying is that we're trying to build morale in some of these departments within the city of Albany by having small gatherings like barbecues and whatnot to try to, what I'm saying is that
The
with these
limitation,
forced overtime, it's kind of making us take steps back and trying to build morale with some of these individuals who are being forced overtime.
I think it's fair to say the limitation that we have is getting the recruits into the system there to get them onto the force. That has been the problem. And I think they've taken a lot of steps to address that by being able to expand the number of recruits who can get into the academy to get them onto the streets. So they've been doing that for a while.
Yeah, the trouble is being able to hire, to their budgeted level. The training academy they have now can only accommodate about 20, and they're down, I think, probably closer to 3 times that. So they're doing the best they can with what they have, and they've had a lot of retirements recently, last year and this year. We've seen a lot of senior officers go, and even some young officers that just came out of the academy.
Right.
But there is a plan. We're moving forward to try and find a better space, and still watch overtime and still trying to boost morale when we can. And some of those events are at least partially covered by grant funding too. Like ACDA will cover school dismissal and pop-up events, so not all that stuff is a direct cost to the city.
One of the
What I was saying as it relates to the events is what we're doing to boost morale, right? With us forcing overtime, it's making us take a step back. We might as well just not even try any effort to boost morale since we are forcing people overtime. So that's the argument I'm making.
I think everyone understands the point.
Just one of the observations about overtime is we don't increase the overtime line to reflect changes in salary or from collective bargaining or arbitration agreements. So when you have, because what you pay in overtime is based on the salary rate that you have to pay. And so salary rates go up, we don't increase the overtime budget. So sometimes it's a moving target. So one of the things we did in the reports that we're supposed to get from police and fire is ask them to tell us how many units of overtime they provide so that we can separate and look at the amount of overtime based on shifts or units versus strictly on cost. And so that's something we get those reports. The fire department has been giving us those reports. We should look at that and see if we can do a comparison.
Everybody should have it last week.
What, this is the most recent one that,
I just printed it out.
yeah. All right.
Oh, no, it's not complete.
I do have it.
That's what I think it is.
Well, that's
The
not,
last one you sent me.
It cut off the bottom. Oh, that's the problem.
So a question about the water number.
Water department?
Yeah. They're,
I'll go try and reprint it.
they're pretty up there too at 32%.
Could you hold for just 1 second? Block this whole section of text and then print it from the block section, and that's how it prints out. That's how I print it out.
Okay.
Sorry.
So the water department has essentially considerable amount of overtime as well. How is that attributed to?
Offhand, I can't say.
I don't believe we have the answer offhand either.
Yeah, they're their own entity, so I think that's a question to direct to the water department.
They're slightly over budget for the quarter, but I'm still pretty confident in their ability to come in under budget. They're below where they were last year at the same point, and they added an entire new crew in last year's budget. So we'll keep an eye on them, but I'm not sure if they'll.
I tried.
The water department does the winter occasion more emergencies, and that might be more what our bursts in the winter.
In terms
It could
of
be.
bursts, that's a good question, but I'd have to reach out to the
If you
water.
get those to us before the meeting, questions like that to us before the meeting, we can go fish those answers out beforehand.
but sometimes the discussion is what makes something come
I
out
agree.
into our heads. Right?
I agree. Anything else on Quarter one?
I think you were going to talk about the fire department and.
Yeah, I'll leave it up to you guys if you want to do that now or if you want, because in like next Friday, we're getting you the list of overtime or all of our information because it has it all pretty much explained on there. But really, it just comes down to there's 240 firefighters that work on given apparatus, and those apparatus have a level that they're staffed to and a level that they're minimally required to be manned at. So we can tell based on how many people we have hired what our overtime is expected to be. And so that's different from police that might have special shifts they have to pick up at court or based on certain calls, or like having to stay late for like arrest paperwork or things like that. But fire's much more simple. So
It's the most predictable.
yeah, so it's extremely predictable.
So, but for you guys, you're at 69% of your overtime budget. So is that like a,
So with that, we didn't hire a class in 2018. By the time that we were actually ready to, based on screening applicants, it was around October. The peak overtime for the fire department is over the summer when most of them are taking their vacation. So we decided from a budget standpoint, we didn't want to take on the cost of hiring a class, which is 14 people's salary plus overtime for instructors, things like that, to have something that wouldn't help us in 2018. So we put off until 2019. We had done all the calculations. It takes 4 months for them to be trained. So we were all ready to go, and we had all of our vacancies counted out. We knew it wasn't really going to significantly increase overtime. But when we actually started the class, we had an anomaly. We had 10 people out on light duty from injuries. We also had several people on long-term sick. It wound up we had about 14 actual vacancies, but around 37 people off duty based on some being at paramedic school, some being on light duty, some people being out sick.
Wow.
Which when you look at the numbers that I'll give you next week, it'll show you, and it kind of goes into what Richard's saying about vacancy savings versus overtime. You're really only getting vacancy savings on the 14 people who are gone when you're getting overtime because you have 37 firefighters who are covering their shifts. And so you have to call on people to do that, even though they're still on light duty and we're paying their salary. They're not able to fill that shift. So that explains why fire's overtime was up for this spring.
Did you want to comment on either of these reports?
It was about something else, but I just wanted to say.
Can you read that? This one. I just have a question.
So go ahead.
If you talk about the facility, realistically, are we looking at this year or looking at next year to kind of?
That's a question for the police training facility, which I don't really know off the top of my head in terms of looking at getting a larger facility to do more class work.
I think they've identified, a site, but, we have to make sure that it's sound from a architectural standpoint, have engineers review it, and, we'd love to get we'd like to purchase a building, but I think we're looking at, at least maybe perhaps in the beginning, and then maybe at least our own option or purchase it. We've got to see what our options are. But it's a spot that they're familiar with, and it should be more than enough to be able to accommodate what they want to do, and then maybe some room for growth.
So they would double or triple the number of recruits?
It would be, to catch them up, they'd have a much larger class. We were receptive to the request a few years ago when they said, we want to leave Zone 5, we want the new training academy. We said, well, obviously we want to see what it's going to cost. They identified those costs, we reviewed it, and we said, yeah, this seems legit, and the logic makes sense why you want to do this. They had to retrain people that were leaving Zone 5, even though we had instructors there, all the police instructors. So it made sense for a number of reasons, and we supported that. But just the capacity of the building has really been a limitation, especially with the recent retirements at the level that they are.
Any other questions on the first quarter report? All right, so we have been provided with a listing of the projects that were in the bans. If I can just, for way of background, when I saw the press release saying that we issued bans for $29.8 million separate and apart from the bonds for the streetlights, I was a little surprised at the number because I had thought that we were down to about $17 million in bans, and I know that we had agreement that some of what we authorized this year you wouldn't be borrowing for this public safety issue that we need to provide the authorization, but Bill Trudeau acknowledged that he probably wasn't going to be using it, so we didn't borrow for that. So that's why I asked for this particular breakdown of that we now have, folks, and this is updated. I think there was some confusion over what I was asking for because previously it did not total the 29.
No, I thought you were asking for the current accounts as opposed to what was actually borrowed.
Right.
The projects that were borrowed for, yeah.
Right. So I will lead off with just a couple questions about this. I'm seeing that under 2018, we have something that is listed. The very first item is street reconstruction. It's $1.5 million. It's listed as an additional authorization. It's actually affiliated with a bond ordinance number from 2017. And I'm wondering, was that because of the numbering of that particular bond ordinance? It strikes me as though we authorized something like $3 million and you borrowed part of it in the bans. So that's one of the things that can trip us up in terms of keeping track of what our authorizations are out there versus what is actually has been borrowed, and all of a sudden the borrowing can kick in.
Yeah, I would, for your mental framework, I would probably suggest using the whole figure every year as the limitation of borrowing. But
The whole figure.
what is authorized? What is authorized every year?
Right.
Right.
But at any given point in time, I don't know whether it's been bonded or it's been banned and what the pay down has been on it.
This is the chart that tells that
Right.
every year.
Right. So now my second question on this is, I noticed that for 2018 projects, some of them, two of them, road safety and traffic safety program, we actually did do a partial pay down. Comes in handy having the microphone.
Yes.
Especially notice who's relying on it.
I need that too, I can't.
So if anybody else wants to
Yeah, that's as a result, as well as the in 2016 capital projects, traffic signal replacement. Those are projects that we've gone down through. One of the, go back a little bit, as a result of all the discussions that we've had here for the last 3-4 years, we continue to do our job and our roles in our office with the administration to make sure that we're not borrowing monies that aren't expected to be used, that don't have a plan for, or the monies that need to be used. The initial ban list for this year was about $34.1 million. But in the course of May and June, we pared that back, and that included previous bans for those amounts, and so they were pared back for this year. Essentially, that's why we got down to 29.8.
So the pay down isn't really a pay down, it's just you're borrowing less.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's not a mandatory pay
No.
down. So we do have to pay down for bans as we go along. It's just that for last year, we didn't need to do a pay down, we're just paying the interest.
Right. The pay downs usually start for a year after the borrowing.
Okay.
When does it start?
A year after. So like 2018 capital projects, you see here, there's no pay down amount here for 2018 projects that we borrowed last year.
Yeah.
Next year, we borrow those again, there'll be pay down amounts here. And the pay down amounts you see here, you can see they're relatively minimal. There's rules that apply to, how much you have to pay down during the course of the ban. But it's, $35,000 on a $75,000, I'm sorry, originally $120,000. We paid off $35,000 because it has a short life, essentially short PPU, of 5 years, so to pay those off quicker.
But in 2020, do you have an idea how much the pay downs are going to be in 2020?
In 2020, offhand, I'm trying to remember from the, it'll be
Well,
somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, $600,000. I'm going off the top of my head, but I have the figure downstairs.
It varies depending upon what the period of probable usefulness is. So, so either you're borrowing it over 3 years in the case of vehicles versus
Right.
20 years in the case of street
Yeah, a
reconstruction.
20-year.
And a lot of them that we authorized last year are on the higher side, 15 to 20 year kind of payoff periods.
Yeah, but we manage that as part of the overall debt service payment, so.
So I will also, okay, so street reconstruction. So this is a little confusing, I have to say, a little disappointing, but disappointing. So I see street reconstruction, we're using some of, again, the 2019, we're using some of the money that was authorized in 2018. However,
Yes.
we borrowed $1 million. We all have constituents who are screaming about street reconstruction. And for this year, if you look at this, we authorized $3 million and we borrowed $2 million out of this year's authorization. Why are we doing that? I'm sorry, did that sound too strong?
What I'd say is that we've worked with the departments to figure out what they see. It's project dependent, really, what they expect the money to be used for and when they expect it to be used. Another component I think that's important for everyone here to realize is that also in part of the discussions we've had over the last several years, we've kind of delved more deeply, I guess, with the departments as to why they make the requests that they make in the way that they do it. And what we've figured out that is habits that have come from, a decade or two of capital borrowing, where number one,
Some departments more so than others.
there's no question. One of the, we kind of locked is too strong a word, but we locked ourselves into a June to June borrowing cycle. And so what we try to do is get off that as best we can. And so this year, the borrowing that we did, the ban issuance that we did, is not a 12-month issuance, it's a 9-month issuance. So that's going to become due in March of next year as opposed to June. What that's going to enable us to do, I think, is get us onto a March borrowing cycle. And when the money's available sooner in the year, it allows the departments to utilize that money starting in the springtime when the projects get started and they want to start the projects, as opposed to them thinking that they have to borrow a year and a half out to make sure they have the money available when they want to start the project next year. So I think that's, in short answer to your question, I don't know, Nick might know, but...
So you're developing the budget, you're having the conversations with the departments. I think a lot of us would like DGS and city engineering to use the money we're authorizing for street reconstruction ASAP. This is what the situation out there is unacceptable, I think. And other people can say what they will about it, but I felt the need to. When I saw that, I was a little dumbfounded. I also want to note that as I was talking to DGS, I was in a conversation with DGS about a street that disintegrated in the last 12 months, but it was on the horizon as being an issue. And I was told by the commissioner of DGS, well, you cut our funding. And I was like, no, we didn't. We didn't. For street reconstruction, we did not. And now I understand potentially his comment, because somehow or other the borrowing was cut for this. And So,
We're not telling anybody to cut anything. You know, we're telling them that we need you to be on top of your project so that we make sure we don't borrow.
unnecessarily.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
We've been doing that for years.
Something that
but-
budget's doing going forward is we're talking to all the major departments that actually take out bonds, and we're getting updated statuses on where they are in their projects, when they're anticipating making their purchase orders, and we're trying to get an updated cash flow on how they're managing their capital budgets.
And you guys know, I appreciate that.
Well, we took our suggestions from some of, but
Yes, we
the
do.
point is that there's going to be a point in time where if a department falls too far behind on current projects, there's no reason in looking at doing new projects when they have so many on their plate that aren't filled. And so that's what we're hoping that the 2020 budget is going to show us is hey, you know, look, the fire department has, you know, 8 projects they're working on that they still haven't done yet. You know, maybe let's hold off on new projects to try to get these ones
But
done.
except that with DGS, streets keep disintegrating. So if you're not caught up in 2017, you can't go on a hiatus of adding new streets because they're
But
continuing.
the funding's there. I mean, I guess part of the point is looking at these bands. You have you know, several accounts that
Would
still.
you like my magnifying glass?
You know what? I might need it because this is the one that I print out. You have you know, one from 19 that still has, you know, 1.1 million left over, and there's a couple more. One has, you know, 295,000 in it, and you know.
From 19?
Um,
Are you
it looks
referring?
like from 18.
Right. okay.
1492-5010-8806.
I'm sorry, give me the ordinance number.
It was GH 1492-5010-8806.
No.
You're looking for the ordinance
Project
number.
number, just a project.
Right here, Judy.
2118.
Right there.
6/21/18.
Yeah, 6/21/18.
2118.
6/21/18. Okay, yes, right.
So
Yeah,
again, I can't speak for DGS because I'm not their CFM, but you know that's something where if I saw that in the fire department or
can you guys call this to the attention of the mayor? Because I would like the mayor to make sure that we're asking these questions because she and her office, you know, talk to Brian and David about the fact that the authorization is there and the money is not being spent, and the authorization is there.
Absolutely. I know that the mayor's office reached out to DGS and asked them to come up with a comprehensive plan, you know, to bring the streets into satisfactory conditions and to identify if they need any additional resources. So
All right,
if they do, you know, then we'll figure out a way to address that. But they need to let us know what they need and you know, at what rate are we going to replace these? If we need to contract outside, let us know that too. Maybe staffing's not there, but let's come up with a plan. So that was something that was forwarded to me that I'm not on that chain and that back and forth, but I'll follow up and see, you know, did they hear back from DGS yet?
and my understanding is the state was looking at potentially providing more funding they were looking at potentially providing more funding to municipalities for some infrastructure kinds of things. And so doing that and seeing the need, et cetera, would be great. I want to also note we were late in the season after I had some issues with how much money was in accounts for city buildings. Looked to authorize just $100,000 for city buildings, and then the next thing we know, we needed a roof on Engine 9 on Delaware Avenue. And it is actually there. It's a gorgeous looking copper
Yeah.
roof. So that's good to see. But I noticed the borrowing on that wound up being not the $1 million that we authorized, but a $500,000. Is that what that project wound up costing? Ooh, yeah.
The $500,000, I believe, was actually for the copper material. I believe that there was labor and other costs that were in addition to that, but I can get back to you on that. Because that's
So,
something I have to follow up with Randy on. 'cause
We
that-
gave you the bonding authorization for $1 million, and I'm saying in the bands, we borrowed at $500,000 on that.
Yeah.
Normally, that would mean that the estimates, somebody decided that it was okay to reduce the estimates on that particular project.
Either to reduce the estimates for the project or understanding that the full scope of the spending of the project would last no longer than a year.
So,
The money might get spent, it just get spent the following, not necessarily cutting the project.
The roof is there. Somebody put it
I-
on, the labor is spent, the materials are there. So,
You have to ask the questions before presuming that that's the case.
right, so I assume that you can.
Yeah, I'll have to follow up because that was moved over to engineering, so I haven't really been following the cash flow on it, but I can.
So who should, Nick?
I'll respond with that.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to know what that project actually is costing us on it. Other questions from committee members?
I just want to follow up question to that, Judy, what you just stated, because I know that we're in need of a new roof here at City Hall. So I remember us kind of switching that to kind of encompass all city buildings, because I think they wanted to borrow.
Right, initially when the bonding ordinance came out for that special one, it initially was drafted by Corporation Council to be Engine 9. And I noted that I don't like these silos where something, now we borrow it and it can only be used on the roof for Engine 9. So it again, we expanded it to be renovations to city buildings so that if we borrowed the full $1 million, then it could be used on other projects. We don't like to create too much of a slush fund there. That's not my goal. So we do try to drill down and get the information, make sure that what we're being asked correlates to what we can reasonably expect to be spent, but understanding they generally need to go a little bit over to make sure that they can cover any kind of contingencies on it, especially when it comes to those kinds of projects.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I'm just thinking, because the roof here needs repair, and so that money can potentially be allocated to, because I know we just borrowed the $35,000 for the net.
Right.
So is that something that they should be looking at?
Did we borrow for it? No, we allocated
There were
the fund.
transfers.
Emergency, yeah.
Right.
Emergency transfer.
Right. So,
I would say,
I will note too, that in the 5-year capital plan last year, for 2019 through 2024, I guess makes it, for 2020, they put in the budget tentatively $5 million for improvements to city buildings, and part of that is recognizing that this building needs a lot of work, and they're supposed to be coming up with a comprehensive plan for
City Hall master plan.
not only that, but also my understanding was they were looking broader. That came out in a meeting. Broader at all of the buildings in terms of looking at a master plan for really addressing our needs on that.
Hopefully coming up with some sort of schedule, so we're not.
And
like,
that $5 million
constantly
is
behind.
part of the reason why, that drove some of the conversations that we had about us being up against our debt policy in terms of payments as a percentage of budget. Looking to the future, essentially, as well as just this year. So I do appreciate the fact that, we authorized quite a bit more than what was actually borrowed, so that you guys are having those kinds of conversations to not over-borrow and overpay interest on things. However, my one exception to that rule.
now you want us to borrow.
Roads. I mean, I have a pothole across the street from my house that I have been begging DGS to fill, and I'm literally hearing ka-thunk, whoa! Like people audibly, like hitting it and going, and some people then stopping near the corner to get out and check the damage to their car. It is like that deep, that wide around, and just getting wider. And I've done the C-Click fix thing.
Yeah, I have
Twice now, and nothing's happening. So my street is getting repaved
Yes.
this year, but this particular situation is dangerous and it needs to be dealt with. But, all right, any other questions? From other council members, Mr. Conti?
I just want to echo what you said as relates to, some of these department heads not utilizing all the funds, the bonds that we're taking out. Again, you could choose any street in the city of Albany. There has a sidewalk, a street that needs to be improved. So when we're sitting here paying interest on bonds that we took out in 2017, 2018, and not utilizing those funds, I just hope that we can echo a sense of urgency to try to do something with it. But I also want to ask you, how's the process? Typically when the department heads come in front of you guys and make a request, just can you walk me through that?
I think,
Like, you verify if the numbers are accurate?
I think a few years ago, it was probably more the status quo for departments to anticipate what they might be spending in terms of capital over like the next couple years, and maybe do like a large bond and then spend off of that. And that's certainly a more expensive alternative. So
Richard, can I just ask for a point of clarification? So Ms. Lieberman has distributed this, and I take it this is what you want to talk to the Finance Committee about?
Yes, well, I just wanted to bring it to your guys' attention, but I know that it's in the Planning, Economic Development, and Land Use Committee. Yeah,
Oh, okay,
but I thought it was worth just bringing to your attention.
okay. I just wanted to see if there was an issue with us taking up public comment on something that's not on our agenda.
It's up to the committee.
Right? So I apologize. Is there...
I think the biggest change is that we definitely have a better dialogue with department heads, and there's definitely an understanding that we don't want to borrow for anything you don't reasonably foresee yourself spending in the next year. We're trying to identify and budget, based on annual needs and plan for 5-year capital planning. But we don't want to authorize for anything more than we have to. And the 5-year plan should be reflective of what you anticipate spending in each respective year.
And this is all project specific too. There could be reasons that, something happened somewhere that you don't know, something unanticipated happened, some other need happened. You have to delve into that before you can make any assumptions that this is,
Just money sitting.
right, yeah, that no one's looking at this or, anything like that.
While we're talking about the capital budget, I just want to go back to what we have raised the last 2 years in the budget intent resolution, talking about the need for improvements to our capital plan in our budget document, get us getting the justification. Some of it has been noted in the consultant's reports with regard to appropriate.
I think it's safe to say you'll probably see a different capital plan, at least visually, in this year's budget.
Not only visually, content,
Yeah, absolutely, but I mean, a
content,
different layout.
explanation, detail.
Different information and different layout.
So, and as you're doing that, if you could again, and I had attached it to my email to Darius and Mike Wheeler, the budget intent resolution. And I have another copy of it, all printed out, because I know it's great bedtime reading.
I've read this many times.
And there were also some recommendations in
You read
there,
it before
including
bed every
that
night.
senior programming, et
Really
cetera,
nice.
that I just want to emphasize again, that I think the council, I think, does take the review seriously, provide some very definitive guidance, and I think that we expect that will provide a foundation for some of what we're
Absolutely.
looking
And I think the capital plan that'll be in this year's budget will satisfy, any concerns you may have had last year. Nick had a lot of work to do in redesigning that, and we took a lot of ideas from different, the state of New York, recommendations from best practices from other cities and stuff. So it's pretty solid, and we're comfortable with it. And
There are some details in there in terms of our expectations, and we talk about our city charter, what our city charter demands, and I
information necessary to be presented with the budget.
And, in my opinion, what has been presented in the past really hasn't been complying with the city charter. So I just want to make sure that you're, again, as you percolate the idea, going back to that document, which provides some guidance with regard to what the city charter says, what the OSC says,
Which
etc.
specific requirements in the charter are you referring to? 'Cause I know that there's some specifically listed, information that the mayor's supposed to include, and then some is ambiguous, I guess, for her interpretation.
Clear general, the 5-year capital plan, a clear general summary of its contents. All we get is dollar amounts. Nothing about what are the projects, what are you anticipating in the way of, and the fire department does break it down for different kinds of apparatus, et cetera, but the improvements to city buildings, there's nothing. List of all capital projects to be undertaken during the ensuing 5 years. Cost estimates, sources of funding, and where appropriate, recommended time schedules for completion of each improvement. And that gets at exactly what you're talking about here with, so if you take this to DGS and the engineering department and saying, it's not just you asking for that information, that is what our city charter requires. So this is on page 8 and 9. We did an excellent job on this. It's a great resource document. It was a collective. That's not me beating my chest. That was a collective. Really, truly different people drafted different parts of it, including staff. And so that's not me beating my chest. That is me wanting to endorse the hard work this council, this committee has done.
Yeah, and like I said, I think, the updated capital plan will address a lot of that, if all of it. But I wasn't sure if there was anything else outside the capital plan that you were referring to.
Well, there are other recommendations in there with regard to more substantive senior services programs, concerns about the census. And
I meant in terms of information in the budget.
I think the capital plan is the one area where I have felt that it is quite weak, and I apologize.
You have the best tones on your phone.
Kind of lullaby music.
So
They're all so
I'm not
soothing.
answering the phone for my son whose birthday it is. I will get to him very briefly. I think in general there has been a feeling that there could be a little bit more text and discussion about some of the assumptions that are made in how the budget is put together and moving forward. Numbers appear in there sometimes in terms of revenue without, especially in terms of revenue, I think, without there being a further analysis of how that number was arrived at. So some of the kinds of things that we then grill Mike on when he comes are, why sales tax is different. I don't think I've seen that. Why retirement numbers, have varied. In some cases, we have an issue with what categories things wind up with. So when something is in a different category from year to year, we are not getting an explanation that is not an increase really in that category, except where we shifted some expenses from one place to another. The pilots, and we've had some discussions about that going forward. So there's some of that kind of thing. I'm glad to, meet with you and Mike and whoever to talk a little bit more about that. I think, that's my off-the-cuff observations about some of the kinds of things. The assumptions underlying the budget, I've noticed other cities do have more information regarding that and how projections are being made, et cetera.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think a lot of cities have less as well. I mean, it's just it's a matter of preference, I guess, as presented, but in regard to the charter and stuff, we'll definitely address anything that's required in there in terms of the capital plan and any other information.
I'd like to let Ms. Lieberman, if we can have maybe 3 minutes,
Okay, sure, yeah, no problem.
which is what we usually limit public comment to.
So, I'm bringing up,
Do you need us? Are we?
All right. Does anybody have any more questions for them before I allow them to go home and have dinner with their families or wherever?
You're too good to us.
Thank you so much for coming in. I think it was a great discussion, and look forward to the next meeting and maybe a little bit more detail about where we're headed on the budget. Keep in mind some of the things that we talked about in terms of trash fee breakdowns that you guys have agreed to, and I appreciate all that.
Thank you. We'll follow up and get you all information as discussed.
All right. Thanks very much. Good night, gentlemen.
So I thought that it was, we brought community choice aggregation up a while back, and then now it's in a committee. But I wanted to bring it to your attention because I think the people in finance, it's important that your questions get answered about it, and I wanted to figure out a way to do that for you. So this is not something that costs the city money at all, right? And it won't save the city money. What it does is it's for residents and small businesses. The idea is that by joining with other communities who want to do this, we create a kind of a buyer's club for electricity. And so we can negotiate a fixed rate for, let's say, a 2-year or 3-year contract. It's up to the municipalities who form the aggregation to decide. I think what's important is that it basically would accomplish 2 things. The idea is that it would help save residents money by locking in rates at a rate that is lower than the previous year's National Grid average rate. All right, so we don't even go into it unless it's lower than looking at the previous year's records. You get the average rate, it has to be lower. So you take that part, saving residents and small businesses money on their electricity, with trying to get as much renewable energy in that package as possible, even 100%. So because the costs of renewable energy are falling, and because we have hydroelectric power plants right in the local area who tell us they could supply 100% of our needs right now, not just our needs, but our needs plus other communities in the capital district. So we can reach our renewable energy goals, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions as a city and helping the state reach theirs. That's why it's supported by NYSERDA and the Public Service Commission, with potentially saving residents, 5 to 10%. And then we can also help save residents an extra 10% off their bill by helping them join a community solar, which you can do in tandem with the community choice aggregation. But it's easier when you have everyone in a big group, because then it's easier to get them to also add that extra 10% on. So yes, I know there's tons of questions about this because it's involving electricity, which is extremely complicated in New York State. And it's also involving an energy supply company. And if you have personally signed up with an energy supply company, like I have, and Mike, we were talking about it before, they tend to charge more than National Grid.
Yeah,
Wait, I'm sorry. This is public comment, it is not a dialogue.
Ah,
No, but I just had,
No, you might have questions, but I'm
And,
sorry.
well, no, there weren't
She
questions,
has
they were
an
more in the line of,
Her time is up.
and my time is up.
Okay.
So, is there a way I can answer some questions? Like, I just want to offer that if people want to meet with me, and I did want to let you know that communities are now moving forward. Bethlehem, New Scotland, Guilderland, Voorheesville is interested, Knox is interested, Niskayuna, and Saratoga Springs has been waiting around for a long time because they already approved it. So they're moving ahead with an aggregation. That's why I came, because I wanted to let you guys know that it's moving forward, and if we don't at least start to look at it as an option, there's no obligation right till the very last, that we won't be able to get a chance to be in that contract with that group.
So this is on an upcoming agenda, right, Michelle? No, it's been assigned to the planning
It's in committee.
committee.
about a year
So
ago.
when the plan, just to briefly answer your question, so when the planning committee takes that up, all council members can attend those meetings. We can ask Michelle to provide your contact information to all the council members if they want to have individual dialogue. But until it appears on that particular committee agenda, I don't expect that we will be, the finance committee will be taking it up. I wouldn't be
No, you
inclined.
wouldn't take it up.
Right. So,
So if we do like a presentation there, we can invite you folks over.
everybody is always noticed about all of the committee meetings and what the agenda items are, etc. And Richard might at times advise people, encourage people to attend. We had two other council members here today who are not part of the finance committee meeting, just as an example. And sometimes we have almost the full council at a particular meeting. It depends upon people's availability, et cetera. And with that, I'm going to, I have a commitment to my committee members to keep this not, have it be a dialogue and have it treated as public comment. And I think it is appropriate for us to probably let other members go have dinner as well.
All right, thank you. Thanks
All right.
for the
and I
opportunity.
think you will get questions.
Yes, and I welcome them. So
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Would you like a motion to, I move to close the meeting.
To adjourn.
Adjourn.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you very